What is Hanukkah? Well, it's not Jewish Christmas. Yes, both take place in winter, and yes, families may gather together, decorations may be hung, gifts may be given, and fatty foods may be consumed. But these festivals have their own reason for the season. While Christmas celebrates the birth of Jesus, Hanukkah commemorates the rededication of the temple in Jerusalem. One story begins with a savior and hope of the world. The other begins with a priest and leader of a rebellion. His name was Mattathias. He was a Jewish elder living in Judea, modern-day Israel, during the rule of Greek dictator Antiochus IV. Upon taking the throne to the Seleucid Empire in Syria, this mad king outlawed Judaism. In the years that followed, he became desperate to Hellenize his kingdom. So he ordered the invasion of Jerusalem in 168 BC. In the name of the king and the god Zeus, soldiers slaughtered thousands of Jews and desecrated their holy temple. It was then that Mattathias turned from priest to resistance commander. He led his 5 sons and a small band of Jewish fighters in a campaign for freedom against Antiochus and his brutal regime. Although Mattathias did not live to see the end of the war, his sons did succeed in their fight for justice. 3 years after the massacre, the Jewish warriors toppled the invading empire and reclaimed their temple, earning the title Maccabee, meaning hammer. But just how true is this narrative? Well, according to archaeological expert Danny the Digger Herman, evidence of the Maccabees and their miraculous revolution is found throughout the Israeli city of Modin. It just requires a little digging.
The story of Hanukkah, this great story of a successful Jewish rebellion against foreign power some 2,200 years ago, begins here. I am at ancient Modi'in, the hometown of the Maccabees. In the 2nd century BC, the Jews were back in their ancestral land, but they were not independent. Antiochus III had a policy that the Jews have to pay their taxes, but they had religious freedom. However, his successor, Antiochus IV, led a complete opposite policy and banned Jewish religious practice. Now, forcing taxes upon a person is one thing, but forbidding you from your religious freedom, that is something the Jews were not willing to tolerate. And here at the ancient city of Modi'in, this is where the successful Maccabean revolt began. The Jews in the 2nd century BC were back in their ancestral land. They have managed to recover from the Babylonian exile and returned to the land of Israel. But they were at first under Persian control, later under Ptolemaic control, and in the 2nd century BC, they were under Seleucid Greek power. And Antiochus III had a contract with the Jews. They had to pay taxes, but they did have certain political rights, and especially important, they had religious freedom. It was his successor, Antiochus IV, who changed the policy and forbade Jews from convening on Shabbat, from circumcision, from keeping kosher. He wanted them to become pagan like he was. And when he defiled their temple in Jerusalem and tried forcing the people of Modin here to join this pagan worship, when his representative reached Modi'in, summoning all the elders and introducing this new cult, it was Matitya, the priest, who approached him in the altar and yet stabbed him to death and trashed the altar and called everyone around him, anyone who is faithful to God's covenant, to our God's covenant, who follows our law, follow me, and ignited the Jewish rebellion. Now, let's put this into context. What are the odds of a few Jewish peasants, farmers, rebelling against a mighty Greek army? A well-trained military force equipped with weapons, with shields. They even had elephants. Matityahu knew it's not going to be an easy task, and he appoints his son Judah to be the military commander. And Judah the Maccabee, in retrospect, one of the greatest military tacticians, realizing that his people are maybe highly motivated but not well equipped, they hide in the hills and they attack the Greeks only when they are not prepared and in the most vulnerable locations. Judah attacks them where they must narrow their forces in this steep ascent and decimates them. But Antiochus is determined. This region is going to remain under my power. Antiochus makes another attempt. And now he sends again a big force to attack Jerusalem, but reaching it from the south. Nevertheless, Judas is again prepared for that scenario. Again he attacks, and again he is victorious. And this time he uses the momentum, and Judas reaches Jerusalem. He reaches the temple. He purifies it of the pagan worship that Antiochus has established there, and finds the menorah with a small juglet with pure oil next to it. He ignites the light. The menorah is lit, but with a small amount. It should last for only 1 day or so, but by miracle, it kept lighting for 8 consecutive days. And this is the source of the Jewish light festival that is celebrated to this day every year around Christmas, Hanukkah. Tracking the ancient site of Modi'in can be done by tracking one specific monument that is described in detail in the book of Maccabees, the tomb of the Maccabees. The tomb of the Maccabees was built on a hilltop and was quite a remarkable building. It had 7 pyramids over it. It had reliefs depicting weapons and ships. However, does this look like a building with 7 pyramids? Does it look even like a tomb from the Hellenistic period? Today, scholarship agrees that while this is very impressive, it is not the tomb of the Maccabees. The location of the tomb of the Maccabees and the city of Modi'in is still somewhat of a mystery. It has to be in this area, but its exact location is still a matter of scholarly dispute. While the location of the tomb of the Maccabees is still somewhat of a mystery, very interesting archaeological discoveries have been made in this area. This is the very southern edge of the modern city of Modi'in, which was developed about 20 years ago. I know so because I bought a house in this section, and salvage excavations conducted in this part have uncovered some very interesting remains dating to the time of the Maccabees. They include agricultural installations like an olive press, a white mosaic floor, and at the very end, a stone structure of benches lined against the wall, focused around the center. This is a synagogue. A synagogue that is dated to the time of King Herod, but beneath it lies another layer from the time of the Maccabees. And this makes it the oldest synagogue ever found in the Holy Land and one of the oldest in Jewish history in general. Realizing that this site could be attributed to the Maccabean themselves attracts Jews and visitors to this day. Some people come and even pray here, at the very same place where the Maccabees may have dwelt, may have assembled at the same spot some 2,200 years ago. While people tend to think that archaeologists are all about big discoveries, like mosaic floors of wine presses or synagogues and temples and palaces, No, sometimes what gets us most excited are actually small little artifacts. Small little artifacts like weapons. This item is an arrowhead, a bronze arrowhead used in one of the battles in the Hellenistic period. And this is even more exciting. This is an American football-like shaped item. This thing is heavy, aerodynamic, and very deadly. This is a device used in the slingshots in the Hellenistic period, both by the Maccabees and the Seleucid Greeks. And finding it here, holding it in my hand 2,200 years after it was used in the battles, is such an exhilarating moment for me. Yes, the Maccabees have battled here a long time ago, but their achievement and their spirit and their legacy is something that we cherish and follow to this day. Happy Hanukkah.
Hanukkah is about miracles, the unbelievable defeat of a tyrannical regime, the incredible rescue of the Holy Temple, and the supernatural gift of light. The story goes that during the temple's reconsecration, the Maccabees discovered a single jar of pure oil. It was just enough to light the grand menorah, but only for one night. Yet inexplicably, the oil not only lasted through the night, but for 8 whole days, feeding the eternal flame. The following year, the 8-day Hanukkah holiday was born, what the Gospel of John calls the Feast of Dedication in chapter 10, verse 22. Now, more than 2,000 years later, some believe that this feast has become more commercial and less spiritual. But for Zev Orenstein, Director of International Affairs at the City of David, ancient Jerusalem, Hanukkah remains a testament to the Jewish faith and a hallmark of the Maccabee legacy.
What is so special about Hanukkah? What does the word Hanukkah even mean? Hanukkah means dedication. What is being dedicated? What we're celebrating on Hanukkah is the rededication of the temple. When the Greeks defiled the temple atop the Temple Mount, one of the first goals, once the rebellion against the Greeks begins, is to take back the temple, to take back the Temple Mount, to take back Jerusalem. Early on in the rebellion against the Greeks, Mattathias and his sons, together with those fighting alongside them, are able to take back the Temple Mount. But they're devastated once they enter inside, because they see to what extent the Greeks had desecrated the temple, had defiled the temple and every part of it, including the Holy of Holies, including the altar. So they couldn't just restart the service. They understood that they would first have to repurify the entire temple complex. And that took time. But eventually they're able to cleanse the whole temple, and they're ready to start the temple service once again. And one of the central pillars of the temple service is the daily lighting of the menorah. And there's a problem, because the only way you can light the menorah is with special olive oil made exclusively for that purpose. But what did the Greeks do? The Greeks, in part of their desecration of the temple, desecrated all of the oil that had been sealed and set aside for the lighting of the menorah. So when the Maccabees come in and want to restart the temple service, they want to light the menorah, they're stuck. They don't have any oil. Until one small flask of oil is discovered, still sealed, still kosher for use in the lighting of the menorah. But there's a problem, because this one flask will only last for one day. And it will take many days before new olive oil will be ready for use in the temple. And so the Maccabees, who themselves were priests, they had a dilemma. Should they light the menorah with that one flask of oil that they had, hoping, believing that some way things would work out? They decided to light anyway. And ultimately that oil, it kept burning. Not for 1 day, not for 2 days, not for 3, not for 4, 5, 6, or 7, but it kept burning for 8 days. Now, what are some of the customs and traditions that people who practice the Hanukkah festival today, that they take part in? The central tradition that we have on Hanukkah is, of course, to light the menorah, or as we say in Hebrew, the Chanukiah, the Hanukkah lamp. Because one of the central elements of the festival is to publicize the miracle, to increase light. And that's why the families, when they're lighting these Chanukiyot, or menorahs, they're lighting them in the window or in the door frame, where people passing by will be able to see that light and to be uplifted by that light, by that miracle, as a reminder that in many ways today, we're all lamplighters. We're all striving to bring light into the world, to our own lives, to our families, to our communities, to our nations, and really to the whole world. One teaching in our faith is a little bit of light drives away a lot of darkness. And Hanukkah comes in the middle of the winter, at perhaps the darkest time of the year, where the sun sets really early. And at that moment, at perhaps the darkest time of the year, it's when we're bringing the most light into the world, to remind ourselves and everyone else that no matter how dark it might be around us, there's always light that we can shine. Another custom that we have on the Hanukkah festival is related to the miracle of the oil. Well, Jewish tradition has come up with a few very clever ways, which is, in short, to eat foods that are saturated in oil. So one of the most common foods is donuts. We're talking about a unique type of donut called a sufganiyah that you find in Israel, fried in oil. And there are all sorts of different kinds with different flavors. And when you walk the streets of Jerusalem, it's become a big business seeing all the different kinds of sufganiyot. But the reason why we're eating donuts on Hanukkah is not just because donuts are delicious, but it's meant to remind us of the miracle of the oil. And one of the things that we try to do in our faith is not just to remember intellectually, but what are the things we can do in our lives to, in some physical manifestation, bring that miracle to life. Now, there's one other custom that has really entered the hearts of small children, and that is what is known as the small toy known as a dreidel. A four-sided top, which has on each side a Hebrew letter. There are two different versions of this top. The four letters spell out the words, Nes Gadol Haya Po, a great miracle happened here in Jerusalem. Or if you're outside of Israel, it's Nes Gadol Haya Sham, a great miracle happened there, referring to, of course, the land of Israel, but the person being somewhere else. Now, what was the purpose of this small little top? And the answer is very simple. When the Greeks outlawed the study of Torah, that was something that the Jewish people would not abide. And so what would they do? They would study the Torah in hiding. And they would have the kids sitting outside somewhere playing with this little top. And when the kids would see the Greek mercenaries coming, they would shout out, "The Greeks are coming, the Greeks are coming." Still today, Jewish children play this game of dreidel. Depending on the letter that the top falls out on, you either earn chocolate coins or you lose chocolate coins. And it's why ultimately, both for its heartwarming and stomach-filling customs, but also the message being so relevant and so uplifting that makes Hanukkah one of the most beloved festivals of our day today. The fact that for the last 2,000 plus years, here in the land of Israel, here in Jerusalem, and throughout the world, where Jews have been celebrating this festival, lighting the menorah in their windows, in far-flung communities, in the most unexpected of places, shows that ultimately the spirit of the Maccabees, the spirit of Hanukkah endured. The idea that when you stand true to your values, to your faith, to your way of life, that ultimately, when you stand with God, things will endure. That even though it may seem dark, the story of Hanukkah reminds us that there is light to be found, and that ultimately we are the ones responsible for bringing that light into the world.
What does the rich and miraculous story of Hanukkah mean to Jews and Christians now? When we return, we'll explore Hanukkah's importance to Jesus and his followers today. With understanding comes blessing. By realizing the heritage of our faith, we are blessed with the revelation of who we are in Christ. And by honoring the milestones of our biblical lineage, we are blessed with a wisdom and appreciation of the power and grace of God. That's exactly what happened to pastor, composer, author, and teacher Dumasani Washington. Back in the early 1990s, he set out on a journey hoping to better understand Christian history. What he found not only reinforced his relationship with Jesus, but also sparked a devotion to Israel and a profound bond with God's chosen people. And we are joined now by my good friend, Pastor Dumasani Washington. He's the founder and CEO of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. Pastor Dumasani, it's great to have you with us. Ever since I've known you, every year at this time of year during Hanukkah, you get together with your family and the local Jewish community and you celebrate Hanukkah. Now, you're a Christian. Why do you do this every year? Why do you observe Hanukkah?
Eric, it's great to be with you. And it's been a rich tradition for my family. It really was our friends there. I'm no longer in California. I'm in North Carolina now, but California for years. And the local Chabad there, both in Stockton and in Sacramento. We were friends with the rabbis there. They would have the menorah lighting there in the city, both in Sacramento and Stockton. We would join with them to express both our solidarity with our Jewish brothers and sisters, but also as Christians celebrating the holiday because, as we know, Jesus himself did it. So it was both an expression of solidarity in the sense of Israel, our Jewish brothers and sisters, especially with all that's going on right now with anti-Semitism and everything, but at the same time, embracing the Jewish roots of our faith. So it was always a rich time. It was a wonderful time with our friends there each time.
Yeah, I think this special we're doing tonight on TBN is an eye-opener for many people who had no idea about the true history of Hanukkah, the Jesus connection to this holiday. How did you discover the Jewish roots of your Christian faith?
Well, that long story, I'll make it a short one, my friend. So it was really, I grew up Christian. My family were fervent Baptists. You know, we went to church all the time. My parents bought us Bibles. So I was always fascinated, Eric, with the Old Testament. They buy us Bibles, and I would spend just as much reading about Moses and Joseph and the patriarchs that I did reading about Jesus. And so that was just something that was always there. But as I got older, I became fascinated with, among many other things, the modern state of Israel, the Jewish people returning from Asia, from Africa, from Europe, and all of those things that made me want to know more about Israel. And in the course of that, wanting to know more about my faith. Jesus is a Jew, born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth, preaches in Galilee. Jesus going to the temple, which is exactly what the Maccabees did. When you read about the story, what actually happened, and then the cleansing of the temple and the restoration of it, and they even decorated it and all those types of things. And they called for an 8-day celebration. And so Jesus then, in that tradition, goes up to Jerusalem, to the temple during Hanukkah, himself observing the victory that God gave to the Maccabees over the Gentiles who were attempting to destroy the Jewish way of life. I don't know if it is anything more Zionist Jesus could have done than celebrating Hanukkah and letting the world know that he, as our Savior, right? He's our Savior, and he's celebrating the fact that God preserved the Jewish people during the feast. It's very powerful, and I believe it's instructive for us us as Christians.
Hey, speaking of the Maccabees and the fight for freedom, the fight for religious freedom, a lot of your work at the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel highlights the historic parallels and the camaraderie between African Americans and the Jewish people. And one of those common themes is that shared struggle for freedom. Could you talk more about that, how that Hanukkah message resonates with the African American experience as well?
There are so many parallels, as you said, Eric, and Hanukkah is one of the most powerful ones, right? And it goes throughout. When we're talking about the Black American experience, you're going all the way back. If you're talking about from slavery through Jim Crow and the Civil Rights Movement and all of those things, one of the things that was a constant where the Black leaders were concerned and the Black community was concerned or things like Negro spirituals, Go Down Moses, or Way Down in Egypt Land. They're talking about the freedom, experiencing slavery, and then believing God for freedom the same way that the Israelites believed God for freedom. One of the greatest abolitionists was Harriet Tubman. Her nickname was Moses, right? So all these parallels ran through. So when it comes to something like the book of Maccabees, or when you're talking about Hanukkah, which is, as you know, still a relatively new celebration for Christians. More and more Christians are beginning to see what our Jewish brothers and sisters have been doing for generations. It completely connects when you're talking about the historic Black struggle for freedom, when you're talking about in this country how Dr. King himself said that there was no other ethnic group more present in the Negro struggle for justice than the Jew. Those are his own words. So you're talking about our Jewish brothers and sisters throughout generations, always identifying with those who are struggling and those who even themselves, knowing what it was to suffer anti-Semitism and hatred worldwide, they would find themselves often linking up with people who needed help to continue to move forward and would fight with them as well. It's a perfect parallel when you're talking about what Hanukkah is, that Jewish fight for freedom, and how that was so much informed when it came to the Black Jewish synergy in this country.
Yeah, talk more, Pastor, about your work in creating awareness among the African American community and in Africa about that historic kinship with the Jewish people.
We like to, Eric, with Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, we talk about this line of succession that goes all the way back to when the Queen of Sheba, 3,000 years ago, goes to Jerusalem and visits Solomon, and basically in 1 Kings chapter 10 declares her solidarity with Israel and the Jewish people. No other nation at that time, there's no other foreign nation that travels, brings a tribute and brings this love and talks about the God of Israel. That doesn't happen. So you have this African queen, here she comes, and she stands in solidarity with Israel, and it sets the stage, right? Because when you're talking about here in the United States, you're talking about Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald at the turn of the 20th century. They come together and build schools throughout the segregated South for Black students who otherwise weren't able to study. So you have that was a generation before you get to Dr. King and Joshua Heschel. We here at the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, we highlight that history, whether it goes all the way back from Queen of Sheba and Solomon to Julius Rosenwald, Booker T. Washington, Dr. King, Joshua Heschel. We highlight that history and that connection between the Black and Jewish communities, and why not only has it been powerful in the past, but why the future, it looks amazing when we're looking at what's going on with Israel and Africa. When we're looking at that synergy, it's going to bless not just the region, but the entire world.
Pastor Dumasani, well said. Hey, the Maccabees stood up, and so can we. Pastor Dumasani Washington, thanks so much for joining us. Keep up the great work. God bless you, my friend, and happy Hanukkah. We'll see you again soon.
You too, my friend. Take care.
And we are joined now by the founder of Jewish Voice Ministries International, Rabbi Jonathan Bernis. Jonathan, always great to have you with us.
Eric, great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, it's a pleasure, and you are the perfect man for this subject. But hey, before you became the rabbi that we know and love here on TBN, you were raised in a secular Jewish home. What was your conception of Hanukkah, this great holiday for the Jewish people, before you became a follower of Yeshua, Jesus, and after you became a follower of Jesus?
Well, far different after I became a believer in Jesus, meaning that I never understood, came out about Hanukkah. But I'll say it was hands down our favorite holiday as a family because it was the Jewish Christmas. And what I loved about Hanukkah in particular is that we had 8 days of gifts. You Christians only had 1. We had 8. So I thought this is a great deal being Jewish because we get 8 days of Christmas, and we lit candles every night as a family. But it had no spiritual meaning. It was just the Hanukkah gelt, or money, and the gifts that followed that made it so special. And we did it faithfully as a family, so it brought our family together.
And then you became a follower of Jesus eventually, and your eyes were opened. You looked at Hanukkah in a whole new way, in a spiritual sense.
Everything changed. I began to understand things about the holiday that I had never seen before. First, I didn't know the spiritual significance of Hanukkah. God promised that he would preserve the Jewish people. And Eric, I want to say this a couple times, but if it wasn't for the miracle of Hanukkah, there would be no Christmas. Hanukkah is about divine preservation of a people that were vastly outnumbered, and through a ragtag group of warriors, they defeated the greatest world power of that era, the Seleucid Empire. And the celebration that lasts 8 days is to commemorate a miracle of rededication of the temple, which was polluted by the sacrifice of an idol and a pig in the Holy of Holies, a pig next to a statue of Zeus, and it polluted the temple, so the sacrificial system ceased, and it would have destroyed the Jewish people eventually if it wasn't for the hand of God. And we light this candle night after night for 8 days, a new candle, to commemorate the miracle of the oil that was enough for 1 day, lasting for 8, while they were able to rededicate the temple. And they're lit by the shamash, which is servant. And of course, it reminds me of Jesus declaring, I am the light of the world. And through me, you are now to be a light in a dark world, set on a hill. Beautiful, beautiful picture of that calling. So now when we celebrate Hanukkah as a family and we're lighting the candles from the shamash, we remind ourselves, I remind our kids, you are now the light that's to be set on a hill to your friends and to your the people that God brings into your path, into your life.
Amazing. And you know, one of the names for Hanukkah is the Festival of Lights. So a pretty amazing parallel there, Jonathan, for sure. Hey, Jonathan, last question. The Jewish people today are back in the land of Israel, their God-given land, but facing many challenges, anti-Semitism on the rise around the world, of course, and enemies at the gates, I guess you would say, that is external enemies in the form of Iran and different terror groups that Israel has to face. You have to think that the story of the Maccabees today, more than ever, would not only inspire the Jewish people, but inspire Christians that see prophecy being fulfilled in the form of the land of Israel.
There's no question about it. God declared his faithfulness in the preservation of the Jewish people throughout the ages. And when we look at stories like Hanukkah, we see a people that should not have survived in the natural, but they overcame because God behind the scenes was fulfilling his promise to preserve them, and he's also promised to restore them. And we saw that in 1948, when sovereignly, supernaturally, the state of Israel was restored. It's the Hanukkah story. Against all odds, the people of Israel prevailed. We saw it again in the 6-day war with the restoration of Jerusalem. Again, the same Hanukkah story, God fulfilling his promises to preserve the Jewish people and restore them. And we're going to see it continue as the Jewish people return to their land from the four corners of the earth and return to their God as their eyes are open and they discover that Yeshua, Jesus, is their promised Messiah. Great story of redemption. Again, without Hanukkah, there would never have been a Christmas.
Wow, amazing stuff, Jonathan. We live in Bible times and a special time this week, Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah, my friend. Thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate it. God bless you.
And Merry Christmas to y'all.
Amen. Thank you, Jonathan. Hanukkah has not only shaped ancient history. When we return, we'll discover how Hanukkah was a source of inspiration for America's founding fathers and continues to provide hope for the persecuted church today. It was an uprising doomed to fail, a temple beyond recovery, a fire that would not survive the night. But somehow, the oppressed won freedom. The holy house was restored, and the eternal flame never dimmed. The miracles of Hanukkah have inspired generations throughout history and across the globe, from the patriots of the American Revolution, whose very battle cry, "Give me liberty or give me death," is said to have been cited from the Maccabee army, and to the people of Israel, who continue to survive against all odds today, and who continue to pray, to honor tradition, and to light their Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a testament to the incomprehensible will of a people, to good triumphing over evil. And columnist, radio talk show host, and public speaker Dennis Prager says this Hebrew holiday has forever impacted the lives of Americans, especially Christians. And we are joined now by nationally syndicated talk radio host and the founder of Prager University, the one and only Dennis Prager joins us. Dennis, happy Hanukkah. It is great to see you.
I'm very happy to be with you. And I can say happy Hanukkah to you too, because the meaning of the holiday is entirely universal. So there's no reason in the world not to wish a non-Jew happy Hanukkah.
Yeah, and this is exciting.
And by the way, I'm a fan. I just want to say for the record, I am adamant about Americans saying Merry Christmas and not Happy Holiday.
Yes.
Just want to make that clear.
Oh, we love to hear
the idea that because I am not Christian, you should not say Merry Christmas to me is pure destructive narcissism. It's a national holiday. It is my country's holiday. Why would I not want to say Merry Christmas?
That's right. You know, we're going to talk about religious freedom, the infringement upon religious liberties, and how that kind of ties into the Hanukkah story, Dennis, and the story of the Maccabees. Hey, a holiday in Hanukkah that is not in the Torah or the Tanakh, but this has become, probably to Americans at least, the most well-known Jewish holiday. Why is Hanukkah to you, as an observant Jew, why is Hanukkah and the story of the Maccabees so important, in particular today?
Again, its significance is obviously to Jews, but it is universal. If it weren't for what happened on Hanukkah in about 167 BC, let's say, if that didn't happen, the monotheistic idea would probably not have survived. At stake was the destruction of Judaism, the one religion at the time that affirmed the God of the Bible. There was no Christianity at the time, obviously. And so if it weren't for this holiday and the defeat of the Greeks who wanted to destroy Judaism, it might have ended the God idea for literally only God knows how long. So its significance is monumental.
Yeah, and the oppressive measures taken by the Seleucid Empire.
Oh, yes.
I mean, people might not realize the temple, the Holy Temple, was completely desecrated. And Dennis, as you said, the worship of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was actually banned. Unbelievable.
Oh, entirely. The interesting thing is, this was not Jew hatred. It was really Judaism hatred that animated the Greeks there. So, you know, whether the Jews survived or not didn't bother them, but it bothered them that this belief in this one God over everybody, one God who judges everybody. Many scholars, and I've written a well-received book on anti-Semitism called Why the Jews. It's in its 3rd or 4th edition. And we note how many non-Jewish scholars have pointed out that the Jews got hated for bringing a universal judging God into the world. This bugged a lot of people.
And it still does today, by the way.
Still does today.
That's
exactly.
And this story is so relevant today. I think the average American, and it's why we're doing this show, Dennis, even perhaps the average American Jew may not know the story behind Hanukkah. Yet the founding fathers of this nation, the United States of America, were profoundly impacted and influenced by the story of the Maccabees, their struggle for freedom and the struggle against tyranny.
If all American Jews appreciated the Bible, especially the Hebrew Bible, and Judaism as much as the founding fathers, Jewish life would be in good shape.
And hey, an interesting element, Dennis, of the Hanukkah story and the Maccabee struggle is we had what were called the Hellenizers. There were aspects of Jewish society at the time who wanted to kind of go along to get along with the Greeks and abandoned essentially their Judaism, their Jewishness. So the Maccabees were really fighting to preserve a whole way of life, as you laid out. Today, we have obviously some serious infringements on religious freedom. We have a rise in anti-Semitism, a rise in Christian persecution around the world. Do you see what's unfolding right now globally and look at the story of the Maccabees as even more relevant today for the times we're living in?
Anybody fighting for the Judeo-Christian bases of the United States is in effect a Maccabee. That's correct. There is a Hellenization taking place both among Jews and Christians. I mean, a vast number of both, but obviously there are so many more Christians in America, have basically abandoned Judeo-Christian values and accepted our version of Hellenic or Hellenized values, and that is the New York Times and the university. That's our Hellenizers of today. And again, vast numbers of Jews and Christians have left Judaism and Christianity for what they're taught at college, which is the opposite of Judaism and Christianity.
And yet our society derives from the values of Jerusalem, from the values of the Bible, the Ten Commandments that you have written and spoken about so eloquently, Dennis, for years, to the point where there was actually a statue of Judah the Hammer, Judah Maccabee, at West Point. How important is it?
I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Is it still there?
It is still there, I believe. It is still there. Judah the Hammer, one of the heroes of the Maccabee Revolt at West Point, because he's also, it makes sense to be at West Point, a military genius, really, a master tactician. That's a whole other story and element to the Maccabee story.
Right, because well, the Greeks so outnumbered the Jews that he had to have been brilliant. That's correct. Yeah. I did not know that. You've blown my mind. It so reinforces my belief that this country was founded truly by Judeo-Christians.
Yeah.
That's what they were. They were Judeo-Christians. They so appreciated the Jewish origins of the Bible, of the Christianity of America. And of course they were Christian. It's painful. It's painful to see what has happened, which, as I said earlier, the opposite is taught today.
Dennis, last question. You mentioned the overwhelming odds that the Maccabees faced against the Greeks, the menorah burning for 8 days straight, a holiday, a festival of miracles here against improbable odds. As you've outlined, we're up against some pretty long odds, it seems, right now, but the story of the Maccabees seems to show us that even in the darkest hour, there's always hope. What are your thoughts on that as we celebrate this Hanukkah?
Well, yeah, this is the perfect analogy. If enough Americans take up the Maccabee cause, as it were, to fight against the Hellenizers, the anti-Judeo-Christian forces. If people understand, liberalism is not anti-Judeo-Christian values, but leftism is. And unfortunately, liberals vote for the left, but that's a separate issue. We need more Jews and Christians to awaken to the threat. And let me just say, as a Jew, the deepest hatred in this country right now is to Christians. I mean, that's not to Jews. There's a lot of anti-Semitism. It's rising because of the left and because of some Islamic forces in the United States. But the detestation of Christianity is just mind-boggling. And of course, I warn people, and this is a perfect note to end on if you want to end, and that is, when Christianity died in Europe, what did we get? Fascism, communism, and Nazism. What will happen when Christianity dies in America? Every thoughtful person needs to answer that question.
Yeah, which makes the message of Hanukkah even more resonant, a message of
That's right.
rededication,
Be a Maccabee.
revival. Be a Maccabee.
Be a Maccabee.
Dennis Prager, you are a Maccabee, my friend. Hey, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, and God bless you. Thanks so much for joining us, as always. Why celebrate Hanukkah if you're not Jewish? Why even bother learning the history or understanding the meaning behind this festive occasion if you and your loved ones don't follow Judaism? As Christians, we have our own spiritual anniversaries and sacred feasts, and many of us would probably agree that we're happy sticking to just one religious calendar. But the fact is, Christianity has Semitic roots. Our Savior, Jesus, is Hebrew. The original 12 apostles were also Hebrew. And in the time of the New Testament, the earliest Christians were seen as a Jewish sect. For Fusion Global founder Rabbi Jason Sobel, Jewish holidays are biblical holidays, and Hanukkah is absolutely for Christians. He says it's not just a time for the Jewish people, it is a time for all people, because it is the Lord's appointed time.
Shalom. I'm Rabbi Jason Sobel. Hanukkah is an important holiday for the Jewish people, but really all the holidays are important. Think about it for a moment. Every major event in the life of Yeshua, Jesus, happened on a biblical holiday. He died as the Passover lamb. He rose from the dead on the biblical holiday of first fruits. And he poured out his Spirit on Pentecost, in Hebrew Shavuot, the same day that the Ten Commandments were given at Mount Sinai. And in the same way those biblical holidays were important in the life of Jesus, Hanukkah is no exception. In John chapter 10, Yeshua Jesus goes up to Jerusalem to celebrate Hanukkah, the feast of dedication in the temple in Jerusalem. And while he's at that feast, he's asked the question by the religious leaders, tell us plainly, are you the Messiah? And he reveals some very important truths about who he is as the Messiah. Things that had been concealed were revealed, but the question is, why did he do it on this particular holiday? Part of the reason why the religious leaders asked Yeshua, are you the Mashiach, are you the Messiah on this holiday, was because they were expecting a Messiah who was going to be like Judah the Maccabee, that he was going to come and conquer the nations, the Gentile enemies of Israel who was oppressing them, and he was going to inaugurate by military force a literal messianic kingdom, the restoration of Jewish sovereignty, just like the Maccabees did. But that's not why Yeshua came the first time. The first time he came as the Lamb of God to take away the sins of the world. And the second time he was going to return as the Lion of the tribe of Judah and establish his kingdom from Jerusalem. They couldn't understand and didn't comprehend what he came to do at his first coming. But of course, there is more here, because there's something significant we have to understand with the word Messiah. We have to understand that Hebrew is alphanumeric. So in Hebrew, you write letters with numbers. The numerical value of Messiah, Mashiach in Hebrew, is 358. 358 is also the numerical value of the phrase, okay, or ha'olam, light of the world. So at the festival of Hanukkah, he reveals himself as the Messiah, as if he's the Messiah. And part of the reason at that time is because he was revealing himself as the Messiah, 358, who was also the Or HaOlam, the light of the world, which is connected to Hanukkah, the festival of lights. Because one of the things that the Jewish people believe is that in the beginning of creation, there was this divine light that shone for the first 3 days of creation, because the sun and the moon and the stars weren't created until the fourth day. That was the delight of God's glorious presence and that light was hidden by God. And one of the places God hid his divine light that you could get a glimpse of it was in the menorah. Yeshua was saying that same light, that's not so much hidden in the menorah, it's hidden in me. And that's why at the transfiguration, when he removed the flesh of his garment, the glorious divine light shone forth. He is the fulfillment of the festival of life and of dedication, because he dedicated his life unto God as a living sacrifice so that we might find freedom and forgiveness in him. Practically, what does this mean for us? Why is it important for believers today? Of course, to understand John 10 more deeply. But practically speaking, the Feast of Dedication reminds us that just like Yeshua went up to the temple in Jerusalem, just like the Maccabees cleansed the temple, so we have become the temple of God. And just like it had to be cleansed and purified, we need to dedicate our lives to the Lord as living sacrifices. And when we do, then we also can become a light to the world and bring the message of hope to the entire world. The light of the Hanukkah candles, the Hanukkah story, is a story of hope. Hope is the belief that our future is going to be better than our past. Your future is going to be better than your past when you place your faith in him, the one whom is the source of all hope.
On the first night of Hanukkah, Jewish believers pray, "Praised are you, our God, ruler of the universe, who performed wondrous deeds for our ancestors in those ancient days, who has given us life and sustained us and enabled us to reach this season." As Christians, we claim Jesus as the Messiah. But God, our Father, is the God of the New Testament and the Old. Within the chapters of both Hebrew and Christian scriptures, we read of his marvels. We see him rescuing, sustaining, and resurrecting Jews and Gentiles. We share the same ancestry, the same author. Our histories are interwoven, eternally stitched to the great I Am. Why does Hanukkah matter? It's a biblical holiday, an opportunity to understand and appreciate the historic divine intervention of God, and a timeless, universal reminder of the human longing for freedom, which is a gift from God above. Thank you for watching. Happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas.
Thank you for joining us as we provide a spiritual insight of what God is doing in Israel and in the Middle East. If you want to learn more about what God is doing in Israel, make sure to visit us on our webpage and follow us on social media. Shalom, and God bless you from Jerusalem.